Hey everyone, this is your Professor Logan Freeman here. This is your first lecture here, your introduction to American cinema, and this is going to be just basically about the history of it, and then just a little direction on how to read film because films are put together in a very deliberate way to help the emotional context of a story kind of come across. So we're going to cover a little bit of that through all this. All right. So let's get started. All right. So before we talk about American cinema, because I think that's kind of reductive about it. I mean it's worldwide. We've seen really cool foreign films. We know that a lot of stuff came from the French. Um, Film is not inherently American, even though a lot of it did happen and develop here. It is for everybody. But I think the main thing to understand is that watching a movie or a TV show, you're trying to determine, what makes it cinematic. I want you to ask that. What makes it cinematic? And it's just like a series, and it says it right here, like a fundamental and complex set of rules. But it's using very deliberate composition to help guide us on an emotional and mental journey. And we talk about cinematic language. All right, we know that language, it's something that's developed over time. It's the same thing with filmmaking. It wasn't all necessarily, everything's a Marvel movie now or something like fast and flashy or whatever. It took like 100 years to get to that point. So how do we read it? So part of cinematic language, we just kind of have to understand what films are now. That we use, certain methods to help us pay attention to specific points and things happening on the screen. So you kind of have to think of, what makes something cinematic. I know that sounds like kind of bougie or whatever, but so it's being deliberate. All right, it's being thoughtful with your composition, your movement, your color, your mise en scene, which we will cover that, what that is. It's all pushed together to help guide intention. So you got stuff like this, like one of the parts of the language is the rule of thirds. It's modeled after Leonardo da Vinci's Golden Spiral, that the most aesthetically pleasing uh, compositions in painting or anywhere follows this spiral, this perfect spiral. And you think of the rule of thirds in composition, in photography, or whatever else, we see this, what's opposite, this thing over here, um, from Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window, that our eyes are drawn to these intersections on the screen, that it fits within that golden spiral, that golden ratio, and helps guide our eyes as to what we're supposed to pay attention to. So our eyes are naturally drawn to these particular things. So you'll notice that in films, that if you're trying to pay attention to something, they're going to be matched up at one of these intersections. And that's going to feel more natural versus if you have somebody fully centered. It feels artificial, but that's also with purpose too. But then we also have within the rule of thirds and in this grid, it helps us read because we tend to read things left to right. We tend to do that with our visuals too. All right, like this thing with A Star Is Born, we read it from left to right. That's where the rule of thirds and the grid thing really helps us out, where we know we're supposed to pay attention to Bradley Cooper singing, and then to Lady Gaga listening, and then ultimately the last most important thing is what he's singing, the words, right? It's all about the connection and stuff like that. So one is the rule of thirds. That helps guide our eye as to what we're supposed to think is the most important. Then we have things like this. Besides that rule of thirds, we also have leading lines. And the leading lines are the other things that you have to do within composition that helps us know what do we need to pay attention to. If all the lines here, like with Train Spotting or The Shining, we know to pay attention to the thing that's closest to us, the largest and brightest is what we pay attention to. And then we know that the next thing, it's wherever the lines lead to. And that is something that, we have the leading lines, which you do need to know that for the test. You also need to know about something called the Hitchcock rule. And the Hitchcock rule is we naturally gravitate towards the biggest and brightest part of the screen. So it's when you're watching a movie and you're like, well, what am I supposed to pay attention to? Um, Usually it's very thoughtfully placed to where we're like, oh, we're supposed to read it from this kid here. It's his POV where he's looking at these ghost twins in The Shining. We know that that's how we're supposed to read it. And again, that is called the Hitchcock rule. You do need to know that for your midterm. All right. And the next part of that, and we have those leading lines, we have the rule of thirds and the grids that help us pay attention to it. Then it's also here the shot sizes and how deliberate we are when we pick those out. Now you're thinking like, uh, have you even noticed this before? Well, as filmmakers, what we do is we pick out stuff based on like how into or outside of a character's head that we need to be. So the wider it is, we have something like this from Skyfall. We need to see physicality. The face is not important. We just need to know somebody is watching James Bond's childhood home burn down. Versus you have a close up of somebody's eye. We're trying to get, if it's an extreme close up, we know that that's a sensory thing. A close up, it's all about headspace and specific reactions. It's the same thing with how we piece them together, that it is a puzzle that we build along the way. So with all of these things, we learn how to build a cinematic language that, okay, well, if we know that we need an establishing shot, we start with an extreme wide shot of a gas station. We know that the next shot should probably be within that gas station, so that orients us. And it's wide, a little wide inside, so we see the two actors interacting, and then the conversation heats up. And then what we know then is that we have a series of close-ups to work on that. All right, let's get to the history part here. And this is all stuff that you will need to know for your midterm. So just make sure to take notes or just read these parts in the book. It'll be just fine. So the main thing you do need to know is how filming came about. And it first started here with Edward Muybridge. It started with a bet from a rich guy who wanted to prove that did horses' feet leave the ground. So used $25,000 to settle a bet. And what was developed here was the first instance of series photography. You do need to know that. And you also need to know who created it. And it was Edward Muybridge. So with this, we know with anything, great inventions, like once we get to the film camera, it is a combination of multiple inventions that kind of come together to create it. So what that means is from series photography, we started having other techniques develop along the same time, like the camera obscura, daguerreotype, magic lantern, the zoetrope. The camera obscura reproduced images through a tiny hole. And you shine a light through this image, project through this tiny hole, and it projects. So we see that in the far left here. This is the camera obscura, so that first created our first types of projections, along with the, again, with the daguerreotype, zoetrope, magic lantern. That all gets combined together eventually into the film camera. Now you do need to know what are some of the other projection techniques that led to the film camera. It is this. So once we created the cinematograph and finally was able to project it, one of the first things that was projected here is a little blurry. I'll post the links later. Was the arrival by a train by the Lumiere brothers, and what happens with film is that the whole goal of it is to suspend belief. So this was the first time that people saw a train without it actually being at a train station. So they had no clue how to react to it. So once they started this lovely short 1 minute film, it caused people to panic, leap out of their chairs, run into the streets, because our poor little human minds could not wrap ourselves around it. All right, that's not going to work. But from then on, we realized that we could accept this reality being projected in front of us. And I'll post these links here, but these are other examples of some of the very first movies and the possibilities behind it. Now, we had this Edison kinetoscope recording of a sneeze. It's just a couple seconds of a sneeze, but people paid a lot of money to see this. And same thing with Workers Leaving a Factory by the Lumiere brothers. It was giving us this slice of life. We were seeing these really intimate moments that were otherwise sometimes foreign to a bunch of people. But then also we had something like with Alice Guy Blanche. She was one of the first filmmakers to discover the way that we could fully suspend belief and create fantasy through set design, through editing, through the edit, that it could create whole new realities. And we can't necessarily watch this here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to post this link and make this one of those movies that we need to watch. But the Georges Méliès Trip to the Moon, this was one of the first real fantasy films where they built huge set pieces and used editing to do special effects, because we did realize that we could, if we're rolling that film camera and you were filming somebody swinging a sword, you just have to hit pause on that camera, stop recording, and then have everybody freeze, and then fly out the person that's getting hit, put in a smoke bomb, and then you re-roll just as the smoke bomb goes off. You can have people disappear in a puff of smoke. So we realized here, well, at least Georges Méliès did, that we could make pure fantasy within film. And so you will need to know Georges Méliès, and you'll need to know Trip to the Moon. You'll need to know any of these other little things, whether it was Workers Leaving the Factory or The Sneeze, when you have to list any of the very first films to come out. Now, to go on with the fantasy of Georges Méliès, we realized that we could pay attention through different setups and moving the camera, going into a close-up and further away, that our minds could understand things. But then also we understood that we could impart meaning with the edit. And now we had something that have developed over in Russia with some Russian theorists, Lev Kuleshov, and you do need to know that, the Kuleshov effect. And that means that we get meaning by the edit of an image smashed up against another image. That's what makes meaning. And now you need to, that is in your book. You do need to know the Kuleshov effect and be able to describe it. And we have here with these pictures that we can look at the top. We see this blank face of this man. We see the image of the soup. We see the man's face again. We subconsciously think that he is hungry. It's the same thing with, he is looking at this child in a coffin. He looks a little morose if it's played in the film realm. And then we have him just staring and ogling a lady. I guess it's to be lusty. I don't know. But because of how we place the images together, that's what gets the meaning. So we've hit the 15-minute mark. So what we're going to do is we're going to finish up the
little theory part here. And then we're going to do our part two next week, just so you're not, you know what I mean, having to keep watching this um, while there's, you know, a storm going out or whatever it is you're going to do this weekend. So, last thing we'll talk about is this Kuleshov effect. And basically, the Kuleshov effect, it has created modern editing that we could impart and go from close up to far away to another close up. We could get into people's head spaces, or we could get new intention. We could splice things together to create meaning. So, what I'm going to do, and then part of the watching for next week, and I'll try to change some of these things, is I'll give you links to these films for you to watch, just so you understand them. Whether you decide to ever watch these again, this is a good place to do it, being forced to do it. So, all right, this is going to be the part one of our intro to filmmaking series here. And starting next week, we'll go into the history a little bit more. And hopefully, if you have any other questions, please let me know. And we'll have some other really good movies to watch. Hope you all have a great weekend.